Many of you, including some of my personal friends, have asked me a very common question when they found out I'm going to relocate to Japan. Hey, are you sure, bro? You're not single, you're not dink. What will happen to your kids? What about education and schools? Another group of people will tell me this. If not for the kids, I would have made the same move a long time ago. In my community post, 44% of you are just like me. And I believe you will be interested in this video if you are thinking of making similar move. For the others, maybe you can also watch on to have an idea on how education is like in other countries. I will break this video into two parts. First, I will explain how the Japanese education system works. Then I will share my honest thoughts on how it compares to Singapore's system, especially from a parent's point of view. For those who are new here, I'm SG Dad, and this channel documents our family's journey as we move from Singapore to start a new life in Japan. We are doing this with our two young children, and education, of course, is one of our major considerations. So let's get started. In Japan, education is structured into several key stages. Kindergarten and nursery is from age 3 to 6, which is similar to Singapore. Elementary school from age 6 to 12, which is just like our primary school. Then we have the junior high school from age 12 to 15, and senior high school from age 15 to 18. And the university or college is typically 4 years. So if you count the total number of years, it's quite similar to Singapore. Education is compulsory in Japan for 9 years, 6 years of elementary and 3 years of junior high school. Senior high school is technically optional, but almost 98% of students continue on. Now, let's talk about the types of schools in Japan. There are 3 main types. Public schools, which is the most common. The cost is very low, it's almost free. They follow the national curriculum and classes are conducted entirely in Japanese. Then we have the private schools. These are a bit more selective and can vary quite a lot. They are not necessarily better than the public school, especially for elementary schools. Some private schools are affiliated with religious organizations, such as Christian-based institutions, and may include religious education or moral studies as part of their curriculum. The cost is higher, typically a few hundred Singapore dollars a month, and they follow the national curriculum, but may offer unique programs, such as a 6-year integrated track that prepares students from junior to senior high school in one continuous stream. Lessons are also conducted in Japanese. And lastly, we have the international schools, which are mainly for foreigners or expats. The cost is high and can easily cost $20,000 a year. And the curriculum depends on the school. It could be American, British, or others. Language of instruction is usually English or the native language of the student body. Most Japanese students attend public schools. Public schools don't admit students based on academic results. It is based on their residential address. So parents cannot choose which public school their child attends for elementary and junior high school. As a result, public junior high include a mix of students. The strong, average, and the weak academically are all in the same classrooms. Now, let's talk about the exam system in Japan. For elementary to junior high school, there is no national exam. However, if you want to attend a private junior high school, you will need to sit for an entrance exam, and sometimes with interview. These can be very competitive, especially for well-known or top-tier private schools. However, even if you choose to continue in the public school system for junior high, you will still need to take an entrance exam to move on to a senior high school, whether it's a public or private senior high school. So this is the most stressful period for students in Japan, especially if your goal is to get into a top academic high school. The pressure and competition can feel very similar to Singapore. At the university level, students take a national standardized test called the Common Test for University Admissions after their high school if they plan to pursue university education. Okay, now that you have a clearer picture of how the Japanese education system works, I would like to share some of our personal thoughts on how it compares to Singapore's system and how we feel about moving our kids into it. Our mindsets may be a little different from many Singaporean parents, and we fully understand every family has different priorities and perspectives. Some parents may not agree with our views, and that's completely okay. We just want to share our experience and thoughts, and feel free to share yours in the comment section too. When comparing the two education systems, I would say Singapore's is slightly more stressful for young children. Two reasons why I feel this way. In Singapore, the PSLE comes at age 12. That's a very young age to take an exam that can shape your academic future. At 12, most kids are still trying to understand themselves, let alone decide what kind of secondary school or academic path they want. Emotionally and mentally, they are still developing, and yet the pressure they face is immense. In contrast, in Japan, the high-stakes entrance exams happen around age 15, when students are older and a little bit more mature. By then, they had more time to grow, to explore different subjects, and to figure out what they are good at. At 15, they are usually better equipped to handle the stress and make more informed decisions. Secondly, based on one set of PSLE results, children are streamed into different secondary schools. And from that moment on, their peers, their environment, and even how they see themselves can change drastically. For some, it becomes a confidence booster, but for many others, especially those who don't perform well, it can feel like a label they have to carry for years. At such a young age, they may not have the emotional maturity to understand that an exam doesn't define their worth, and yet the system makes it feel that way. And that can quietly shape their mindset, self-esteem, and motivation going forward. In contrast, Japan keeps students together in a mixed ability public schools through junior high, without any streaming based on academic results. This means kids are not immediately ranked or defined by their grades, and they get to grow up in a more socially and academically diverse environment. It also gives late bloomers more time to catch up without being penalized so early in life. The system doesn't rush to label the students, and emotionally, I think that's much healthier. That is why in the recent election, quite a number of candidates also mentioned about the need to reform our education system. Now, when we talk about people, meaning parents and the culture behind education, there's also a big difference. As mentioned in the previous part, Singapore's system encourages a more academically homogeneous environment for students' learning, which is not wrong, and there are advantages to that, such as easier for teachers to manage and better management of resources. However, realistically, parents will only want to be in one end of the spectrum and not the other. This is also why not doing well in the PSLE feels like such a high stakes risk, and that's what drives so much anxiety among parents. Many parents will take no pay leaves or sabbaticals to coach their kids through PSLE, and some children go through intensive tuition just to stay competitive at that age. That is why Singapore's private tuition industry is now worth billions. It's no longer meant for struggling students to catch up, but for parents to give their kids a head start. It has become a competition of resources, like who can afford more tuition, who can give their child the edge. And many students spend hours drilling practice papers and going through model answers. Even after they have already grasped the topic, it starts to become less about real learning and more about chasing perfection or trying to stay ahead of others. Over time, this can weaken a student's intrinsic motivation. Instead of learning for themselves, they start relying heavily on external help. Some parents have even told me, "Without tuition, my child is totally lost and do not know what to do. And that is why I have to continue to let them go for tuition classes." And as everyone pushes harder, the bar keeps rising unnecessarily. Now, to be fair, Japan has its own version of tuition as well, the Juku or cram schools. But the key difference is that Juku is usually targeted for specific goals like prepping for a high school or university entrance exam. It's not as deeply embedded into everyday schooling. Not every student goes to Juku. In Singapore, tuition has almost become a basic requirement, something you do whether your child needs it or not. That's a huge cultural difference. So even if we brought Japan's education system into Singapore and remove the PSLE, like what some candidates in election mentioned, I'm not convinced that the stress would go away. Many Singaporean parents and also foreign parents, which there are quite a high number in Singapore, might still turn it into an unnecessary competition, just like what we are already seeing now. The problem isn't only the system, it's also the mindset and culture. Japan has its share of kiasu parents too, but overall, from what I've heard from foreign parents in Japan, there's also a large group of families who are less obsessed with academic achievement. Success is not always tied to exam results. The third point I want to touch on is the challenge of our children adapting to the Japanese education system without knowing the language. I believe their current age, around 4 to 6 years old, is actually quite ideal for this kind of transition. At that age, young children are incredibly adaptable and their minds absorb new languages and environments. Recently, I started teaching my elder son how to recognize and write hiragana, and to my surprise, he picked it up within just a few weeks. And I was quite impressed. I remember it took me months to reach the level he's already at. That's why we didn't consider international school. We believe it's better for them to go directly into the local system and pick up the language naturally. If they were already in their teens, say 13 or older, it would be much more difficult. Adjusting academically, socially, and emotionally would be harder. We have also learned that many local governments in Japan offer support programs to help non-Japanese students catch up, including language classes and volunteer support. So that is very reassuring. I also like how Japanese elementary schools place a strong emphasis on outdoor activities and health. Kids are encouraged to move, play, and spend time outdoors. Maybe that's why you rarely see Japanese kids wearing spectacles. The education seems to support all-round development more. And lastly, I want to talk about English language ability. Japan is not known for strong English education, and we acknowledge that. So that is something we will actively manage. We will continue speaking English at home, reading English books, and letting our kids watch English content to expose them to English as much as possible. Fortunately, they have already built quite a good foundation in Singapore. In fact, being proficient in English may become an advantage. English is now part of many entrance exams for high school and university in Japan, just like how students from China have an advantage in Chinese exams in Singapore. I've been reflecting on the true value and essence of education. There are, of course, textbook answers to why children should work hard in school. But if you ask most parents to answer honestly, I believe many will say something like, I want my kids to work hard so that they will have more options in life, so that one day my child can pursue careers that require very strict academic qualifications. That's perfectly reasonable. Study hard now and enjoy more freedom later. But here's the paradox. Sometimes when a child does succeed academically, they start to walk a very specific path. A path lined up with prestige, expectations, and smart choices, such as medicine, law, finance, the careers that sound good to everyone else, and careers that feel too valuable to walk away from. Let me give an example. If you enter a top school, you get a scholarship, you became a 3-star general in the military, your path is almost set for you. Maybe you just want to own a prata shop at Jalan Kayu or be a laundromat business owner. You can't really do that, right? Okay, I digress. So the freedom of choice that we were all chasing will start to vanish. And not because the options disappear, but because certain paths become too hard to say no to, even if you're not interested in them. The real question we should ask is, are we helping our children to build more options for their lives, or are we just building a track that looks good from the outside? So we always remind ourselves to value the journey and not just the destination. I recently saw a quote by Alex Hormozy: those who enjoy walking will walk further than those who are only focused on the destination. And I think that is the essence to lifelong learning. Our kids may not be sprinting like their peers in Singapore, but if they are walking with joy and purpose, taking in the sights along the way and surrounded by good company, then I believe we have already given them what truly matters. Not sure whether you will agree with me, but if you found this video helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing. And if you have your own thoughts or experiences about education, I would love to hear it from you in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.